Hello.
Hi. Thanks, Kath, for doing this. That's the first thing I want to say, because I know that it's kind of hard being on camera and talking about something as personal as your own family. But I think that this is something that will help other families. So
I hope it does.
I wanted to ask you, first of all, when you were aware that Jason had any sensitivities or any problems or was headed for trouble?
I really wasn't until the fire department told me that they felt he started it. He'd started fires at my mother's a few years prior. But then I took him through the fire program, but then I thought that was it, that he was fine.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize it was, the fires were away, he was crying out.
So when he was 5, wasn't it?
Yeah.
When he went through the fire department program the first time?
Yes, it was.
What did they do with the fire department?
Steve Mueller, he talked to him, showed him pictures, tried to caution him. Now they had told me that it wouldn't hurt to get him more counseling, but even then I didn't understand that he was crying out with the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so Jason said at the time he was cold.
Mm-hmm.
And we just felt he used poor judgment.
And then, so when he set the second fire, he was 10,
Mm-hmm.
5 years later. And now he's older, and we do know some of the things that were sort of causing him to be really upset. But back then, there were a number of things that were going on for him, and we've sort of put the puzzle together since then. What were some of the things that were bothering him?
Well, even before we left Virginia, the day before, we got a call that my aunt had been killed by a drunk driver. We came out here, and it wasn't even a couple months later. My sister and I had been in a car wreck. She ended up handicapped over the deal. Then a couple months after that, I ended up in the hospital with a blockage and major surgery. And his dad by then had gone on over to Germany because we were in the military at the time, and he'd been stationed over there. And from there we had Aunt Norma die, and ended up with some other cousins. My mother and my cousin Vicky both had been diagnosed with terminal cancer and was going through that. My stepfather committed suicide. My cousin's daughter turned out to be one of the Malala victims. And then, of course, our dog died, and just a number of things. My stepdad, I think I mentioned, committed suicide, and then my mother died, my cousin, and several others, and family members, even on my husband's side.
Now, this is a huge list. How many years did all this stuff occur?
From the age of about 4, and we just, trying to remember, my husband just had another loss in his family, but I can't remember exactly when. It's been within, I believe, the last year that he had another death.
Okay, so this has been constant since before the first fire. And then there were a number of things that were happening in your family, even besides all those losses, when he was about 10.
Yes, it's not only included the death and the separation from my husband with him overseas, but it turned out our second son had been sexually molested as a child and had acted out on it by molesting children in the family, including Jason and things. And this came to a head as our second son had been turned in, or I had been informed and I had to turn him in, because I wanted him to have the therapy, because I myself was a victim and did not want my son victimizing. Mm-hmm. And there was things that the kids were saying that Jason knew was a lie, and he was angry because every time he did try to say what he's seen or knew to happen,
and I still get called a liar to this day.
Even though later down the line a second cousin verified a lot of the stuff while Jason was here in the hospital, where there was no way they could elaborate their stories.
So Jason was involved in a lot of the investigation for your second son.
Yes, as far as basically the immediate family, the authorities never questioned him. But I
because my brother got away with it.
I would talk to my sisters whose children were the victims, and also another sister-in-law, and Jason would overhear things that was being said, and he'd take and tell us what he knew. And yet when it came out that he said something, then it was, no, Jason's lying. It was always Jason's a liar.
I've been dealing with that even with my
He
ex
just
here.
got fed up with it, and I think he kind of snapped there.
And that's probably about the time when you set the second fire.
Yes, it was.
So looking back on it, it's pretty easy to see. But at the time, when he set the fire, I bet the focus was more on John than on Jason.
Yeah, he was concerned, and I found out, too, that not only was he concerned about John, but he himself had been a victim,
Mm-hmm.
and he was afraid to speak out because he didn't want to get his brother in more trouble. He was afraid for his brother.
So while all his cousins were telling what had happened to them,
Uh-huh.
and then sometimes adding on to
From
that,
3 to
too,
5.
Jason was sitting there with the knowledge that he also had been abused
Uh-huh.
and couldn't say anything
He
about
was
it.
afraid to say anything because there had been so many allegations against his brother, and he was definitely afraid for him.
Damn near 30 years to the date was I diagnosed with
He
autism.
knew of lies that was being held against his brothers, or brother, and so he was just angry. And
I remember asking him the first day that
I haven't seen this in
talked
30
with him if he had been abused, and he looked me straight in the face and said no, he hadn't been.
well, that was the way he did us. It wasn't until he'd been up here, about a month, that I went up to visit him one day, his dad and I, and next thing he says, Mom, I want to talk to you.
I've been masking the whole
Okay,
time.
and he told me, and of course I got hold of you immediately. I think I irritated the head nurse there because I wasn't going to tell her what was going on
Mm-hmm.
until I explained to her. Then she got a hold of me.
That's certainly understandable. But when he all along, before he had really told what had happened, he was pretty believable that he hadn't been abused.
Uh-huh. I didn't think he had. I really didn't.
I believed him. He really did look you straight in the face and didn't look uneasy at all.
Didn't bat an eye.
Uh,
I wasn't, and that was it.
It's called childhood
the
masking.
therapy was going along pretty well, but there was still some anger there that we just couldn't figure out why he couldn't get past it, and that was probably part of the piece.
Yeah, he was holding back.
When he set the second fire, and that was a major fire, and you lost quite a lot of property damage, and it could have been life-threatening.
Yeah, they're still surprised he wasn't burned or killed.
Mm-hmm. At that point, did you think that he was a quote-unquote fire setter?
I didn't really think he was still
I had to
a
stop and
firefighter,
pause
but I
this.
knew there was-
Sorry, I had to let the dogs back in.
I see them, or seen them as going out and just victimizing for the heck of it. And I didn't put Jason in a category.
Mm-hmm.
So that when I first came forward, I was doing it because I knew there was a problem that had to be dealt with, but I still didn't visualize him as an actual arsonist or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. What was your view of what an arsonist would be like?
Somebody just to be vindictive or as a practical joke or something, going out and starting fire just to get their kicks
Mm-hmm.
and things. And I didn't visualize him going out starting fires just for the fun of it,
Mm-hmm.
and things, which I first seen an arsonist doing.
Mm-hmm. Jason isn't a vindictive kid who just does things for the heck of it or to be mean to somebody.
Not as a rule, no. And things. Even the time he did start the fire, and things, he originally started out with the intentions of helping his brother,
Right.
but then got fascinated in it and seemed to take, and I don't know how to explain it, but
That part there, I'm going to stop right there. Because what happened was when we were trying to start the barbecue, we couldn't get it started. And I was never taught about the volatility of gasoline or anything like that. And I seen my dad and them use it on the burn pile out back. So I thought it was the same thing as what was used in the barbecue, like barbecue fluid. Wasn't told the difference, nothing. And so when I put the match in there and my brother was standing there, we were having trouble getting it going, so I grabbed the little gas can and I went to dump it in there, and it flared up and I dropped it right there. The reason why they think I did it on purpose is because I didn't get singed. I got called a liar over that for many years. And see, I've been dealing with this for a long time. This is a very, very personal part of my life that nobody knows about. Neither of my children's mothers seen this. Neither of my kids have seen this. I haven't even seen this since I was a child. I just happened to find this about 20 minutes ago.
Fraction out of lighting the fire at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And
Now that's what we've sort of figured out
uh,
over the months of his telling and retelling the story and adding more things to it. But he really hasn't come out with the absolute, complete story yet.
no, he hasn't. I think he's afraid to, because now again it goes back to his brother.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what his brother said or he said, they were the liars.
Mm-hmm.
And it seemed like because the kids had a problem,
My
that
mom had a
made
problem
them
calling me a
bad
liar a
kids and
lot too.
liars when they did try to tell the truth, nobody would believe them, so they figured, why bother?
Right.
My mom
And
did that
also,
for a long
he had
time.
given John the advice to be honest to all the investigators and the treatment providers and all that. And then what happened to John?
No matter what John said, he was lying. The other kids was...
And the reason why he kept failing was because of where I was concerned. I was the one victim of his that was not that he got away with, and I was the longest standing one from the age of 3 to 5. My mom said years later, right in front of me, that she was happy that my brother got away with it.
blame him for anything, and he took the fall for it. He's in Oregon State Hospital now. There is still one victim he still denies any contact with, sexual contact, but yet he admits to things far worse, including the sexual attack on his brother.
Mm-hmm.
Yet he got away with
He
it.
said more than other people have said. I mean, his victims have accused him of things, but John has actually admitted to extra things.
Yes, he has.
And then, has that helped him in any way?
No, I think if anything, all they did is persecuted him more. He was told originally, and we encouraged him to tell the whole truth, who all he victimized. And he was told that if he said who all he's victimized and stuff, all it would do is get him therapy. Get these kids help so that they wouldn't victimize like he had. Because see, John didn't just start doing that either. He was a victim of molestation. He was molested by a babysitter, and then when her brother found out, he was sodomized by him. And he was untreated because we didn't know. The boy threatened him that he would get in all kinds of trouble. So he grew up. I believe his cousins were playing him, and his cousins was playing, as they referred to Old Crusade, playing doctor. And as the cousins outgrew it, that's when he became into the next phase and became an offender himself.
So when he followed your advice and he admitted to all these things, what Jason saw was that things got worse and worse.
Yes. He found that his brother was being persecuted for things his brother wasn't even at fault for, or incidences were blamed on his brother that he himself had witnessed through a window, and then was later confirmed with another cousin.
Jason has since come out and said this, told about his abuse. And he did that, I think, after a lot of questioning and really getting to know the treatment providers, and still with a lot of fear.
Yeah, but I think he got to feel comfortable with the people around him and realizing that the counselors and the staff was trying to help him and that he wasn't going to be punished. And then I think you had made him understand, too, that the fire department wasn't out to hurt him family. Whereas before he was afraid of the fire department. And because he had been threatened that very same night of the fire, that he could end up going to juvenile hall and what have you. And it frightened him and buttoned him up more.
Was he afraid of more than just of them being put in juvenile hall? Was he afraid of being taken away from his family?
I think so. I really believe he was. And because the threat had been made.
And also, John, there was a threat that John was going to be put in jail. Was he afraid he was going to be put in jail also?
Yeah, well, by that point, his brother, if I recall right, had already spent some time down at the Oregon or Portland City Jail.
Right.
And he was upset about that, because here his brother had said everything he was supposed to, or supposedly admitted to everything, and Jason was seeing this, and yet the law, instead of letting him get his brother get help, they persecuted him further. And so he was afraid of that same persecution.
So all these things were sort of weighing against him being honest and fair. And I'm also aware that there were some family problems that were going on too. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Well, my husband's an alcoholic, but he's not willing to admit it. We did, before Jason got out of the hospital, we rented an apartment. My husband and I did separate. We're back together now after John went into a state hospital, and we decided to try working things out for Jason because he's gone through so much turmoil already in his life.
And it never ended.
His brother lived at the apartment with his dad, and then he came home and stayed with me, Jason did.
How long have you known that your husband is an alcoholic?
I've known my husband's an alcoholic most of our married life. And I suspected it in the earlier stages, but didn't really think about it or let it bother me. And things, because if I said something, he would quit. But
what she doesn't realize is years later, is sometime later, and we ended up learning about how my mom used to do plenty of drugs and even try an acid at one time. So yeah, you guys have no idea what I've been through growing up, and even my own mom, right there, what you're seeing is just one side of her. I had to go through my whole life like this, and every person I've dealt with has pretty much been like this.
Where I would bring him genetic beer in, which non-alcoholic, and he would drink that for a while, and I'd think, okay, we're going to get it square. Then I'd look in the refrigerator one day, and I'd see some off-the-wall brand of beer. And this has happened consistently. Now I don't allow any kind of beer in the house because he is still an alcoholic and he is still untreated. And it not only concerns me, it concerns Jason.
Jason knew that his dad was an alcoholic. I think my guess is Jason probably has known for quite some time.
Yeah, I don't think he fully understood what an alcoholic was until I voiced it. And things that I think he suspected it. And he just didn't understand for sure if his daddy was or not.
So he had a bunch of things to be angry about. He was angry about his dad drinking. He was angry and sad about all the losses. So many losses in his life, all just one after another in the years prior to his becoming.
Yeah, he just did have a cat hit by a car too a couple weeks ago. So now he's really frantic again.
Now, was he having trouble with the neighbors picking on him at that point too?
Yes, I won't use names, but no matter what happened, it was Jason's fault. The kids, the oldest boy and Jason were a year apart in age, Jason being a year older. One time, Jason and John had been over playing baseball with these children. The mother came out, and part of baseball is stealing bases. Well, they stole the base, the next thing she comes out, and she says, look, you're not going to be playing that nigger ball here. My kids have been brought up that people are people, and this upset Jason for not only to judge the way the game was played, which was in fairness, but also to make a racial slur on it.
That was actually the second time I had ever heard that word in my life. The first time was up in Washington when I got beat up by a whole bunch of kids and got accused of saying that word when I never even knew what it was until that moment.
Because he has black friends as well as white, and he didn't feel she was right in judging that way. But then just before we came up here, there'd been an incident where her kids were throwing rocks and apples and pine cones and things in the yard. Well, Jason got to throwing the pine cones back. Well, he went away one weekend. They went away. They came back, and one of the windows was broke. They're saying Jason did it, but Jason wasn't home. And he was called names and, stay away from here. And this harassment not only went on at home, it went on at school. And even after he got out of the hospital, when they found out he had spent 2 months up here, they went to the school, the kids did, and spread it all over school so that the health nurse there had to personally take and talk to his class before he could attend school again.
So that's a huge number of stressors.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't a place, really, where he was completely safe.
No, he didn't have a sanctuary. And we had tried to even get him to church.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to this even coming out with John, we didn't know. We'd gone back to church trying, to stabilize because we just retired and moved back home.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as the church found out about John, we were pushed out. We were closed. Whereas they were visiting us weekly, at least once a week.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as they found out about John, the doors were closed. We had the fire. Nobody showed up to make sure anybody was all right or
they really turned
anything.
away.
It just literally closed the door.
Mm-hmm.
And so we haven't actively gotten involved in another church because it's really done a lot of damage to them.
Sure. So there really wasn't any, not in the community, not in his home, not within his family, was there a safe place?
No, he didn't know this. He still really doesn't know the safe haven except with his therapist and things, and then mommy and daddy.
Right.
And the school's gotten better. He does have several good staff there that's back behind him.
Mm-hmm.
But the school still, he feels frightened or in jeopardy because the neighbor children are still there. And he just never knows what to expect.
They are. And when these stresses come back, I mean, he just had another loss with his cat. The neighbors are still there. They haven't moved away.
Well, they moved up the street, but they go to the same school.
They still go to the same school. And his dad always still has the possibility that he's going to take up drinking again. How afraid are you that Jason could set another fire?
I think as long as we keep the communication, we'll be all right.
Mm-hmm.
But if the door closes, I'm frightened for him because that's his way of taking out his anger.
Now, in the middle of treatment, certainly when he was still in the hospital, but even shortly after that, when he'd get mad, he'd say, I'm thinking about setting another fire.
Mm-hmm.
And we could never not take that seriously, because then he would.
Yeah, well, we still to this day monitor cigarette lighters, matches, or anything. Mm-hmm. If we have company in the house, staying the night or something, we make sure that they take their cigarettes that they smoke with them, with their lighters and so on, because we don't want it in. We've had incidences where one of Jason's friends, or actually two different friends, came over to the house, young boys, with cigarette lighters, and they were asked to take them home because they're just not allowed in the house with them.
So you've learned to be more careful, and you've learned to keep the communication open.
Mm-hmm.
What else do you suppose Jason has learned throughout this whole process?
One, that he can talk, that there's people he can talk to.
Mm-hmm.
He knows that we do care about him and support him.
Mm-hmm.
Do I?
Unfortunately, he has learned not to trust everybody
Mm-hmm.
and things. That people are going to lie about you and so on, and that there's nothing you can do.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's learning to trust the authorities a little more, in dealing with them over the last year. But basically that's been my call.
Okay, that's a lot. Here's the part that I think is especially important. I wanted to ask you if there was something that you wished you had known when this whole thing started with Jason. When you first got the phone call that he had set fire to your house, for instance. Is there anything you wished you had known, or somebody could have told you or given you information about?
I wish that when Jason originally set his first fire at 5, that not only had they said, well, it wouldn't hurt to get him more counseling, that I understood that they thought that there was a problem there, that he seriously needed it, that he was crying out for help, because maybe then this wouldn't have happened. Also, it might have come out with my older son. My older son may not be in the state hospital now, because we would have caught him at, John would have been at 11 years old at the time.
I was 11
We would
then.
have caught him at an earlier stage. He would not have victimized the children and the family that he did. And things, and I think my family would have not gone through the nightmare it has this last year, because it's not only affected us in the home, it's affected our relationship with everybody in the family.
So if the fire officials, the fire department had said very strongly that this is a cry for help.
I probably would have undoubtedly would have done something. But at the time I was dealing with my mother dying and stuff. She hadn't died yet. I was taking her to the doctors and everything. And it was something I put on the back burner because I didn't feel it was important.
Mm-hmm.
And things that he recommended therapy, but I just figured, like I said earlier, that he says he was cold, and we just took him through the course to show him fire safety, and
Right.
that's all he needed. And I did not know that was his way of saying help me.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to thank you very much, Kathy, for doing this and for sharing parts of your family and personal things like you have. I'm sure this is going to help a number of other families.
I sure hope so, because it's got to stop. And there's the whole way they're handling it, and people have got to be educated.
Well, you've just done your part.
I hope so. Thank you.
I haven't seen that since. I'm still trying to figure out how to turn this thing on. I haven't seen that since I was a little kid, not since back then. That's a part of my life I never talked about. My kids didn't know about. Or anything. Yeah, the therapy helped. I didn't, after that situation with my house and catching the barbecue and then the chicken coop, or chicken/cat coop, it was more of a cat thing. And then the house on fire. That shit never happened again. But instead of doing that, I started bottling. But watching that and listening to my mom, I can't help but sit back and look back and realize that I had every sign of autism going on back then, too. I understand why I get so upset when I'm telling the truth, and I get angry about it because I'm constantly being called a liar. I'm constantly being dismissed. All that. So I just shared probably the most personal thing in my life, and then so I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you.